Yeah. All right. So first we will see about the reflex control of movement. Since all of us are very familiar with this, I'd like to move a bit faster. Some of the students might find it slightly harder to understand. Where you are not finding it clear, you can please ask me. Okay. All right. So how have I organized this is primarily first what we'll be doing is we'll be looking into the normal motor control. Okay. What's the major, how does the motor control system work in a normal person, and what's the major concept of that particular model of motor control, that we'll be looking into. Next, we will look into what is the specific role of brain in controlling the movements. Third, we will look into how does a correct movement performance come, because once a movement is initiated, it needs to keep going. So the ongoing movement, how it is being corrected. And next, we will look into what is the abnormal motor control, which is happening. Okay. So how does, within that model, how did they conceptualize abnormal motor controllers? And finally, how do we understand motor recovery within that particular model? Okay, right? So as we see all these components, we'll be looking into what are the fundamental questions posed to the basic concepts of these model. That is number one, reflex model. Number two, the motor program model. And the lack of awareness or the clarity in the concepts, what is there at the current point of time. So we will have a discussion about it. Okay. So according to the reflex model, how did motor control happen? So we all know and are very familiar that motor control was brought about by a movement unit called reflexes. So Sherrington was the father of reflex model. So he said that movements are produced by reflexes, right? So that basically formed the movement unit. And once he said that, many people started finding out, including him, what are the different reflexes that were there, right? So Rudolf Magnus, he has identified reflexes, multiple reflexes, um, monosynaptic reflexes, oligosynaptic reflexes, polysynaptic reflexes that traverse the spinal cord, that traverses the brain stem and the brain, right? And from that, they developed a concept that since the motor control, in motor control, the reflexes are controlling, there are hierarchy of reflexes, one controlling the lower one through in an organized way. That's what they had told about. Next, we see that these reflexes basically control the muscles. Okay. So for a reflex, we know that a stimulus should be given in order to get the response. So basically, whenever there was a stimulus of different forms, the responses were coming for that. One of the major critics of the early models of reflex theory were the responses were stereotyped. That is, when you give a stimulus, the same kind of responses keep coming. This is what we understand in the reflex model. So in summary, reflexes bring the motor control, and the responses which come out of these reflexes were stereotyped. So now moving on to the second part, we see what is the role of the brain. Okay. Now, brain basically was involved in excitation and inhibition of the muscle actions. Okay. So what happened was when sensory inputs, that is stimulus from numerous receptors, is bombarding. So whenever we are moving normally, what happens is you get sensation from all the parts of the body, and they keep bombarding the brain, right? So if they all bombard, then what happens is you will get a lot of responses. Okay, right? So in order to prevent that, the unnecessary stimulus were prevented from creating abnormal responses in normal person by active inhibition from the brain. All right. So these were achieved through inhibitory pathways and excitatory pathways. For example, we have the corticospinal tract, which was considered to be excitatory pathway, and there are many subcortical spinal tracts, right? So rubrospinal tract and things like that, which had different functions. So some were overall exciting, some were overall inhibiting, and so there was a balance between that. So according to the reflex model, this is how we find it. All right. And the next one is we see about how the movement is continuing. That is, as the person performs a movement, how does it come without a error? Okay, right? So whenever the movement was performed and it had an error, the peripheral sensory system provided feedback on the error, and the error was corrected. So the major theory which brought in was Adams closed loop theory. I hope many of the seniors are aware about Adams closed loop theory. So basically it tells that whenever a movement is happening, if the movement is not proper, then the feedback will go to the nervous system and the nervous system will correct it. Okay, that's how the error correction happened according to the reflex model. Okay, so I will just see what we have seen till now before going further. So the flow is, first we saw how does a motor control happen, right? Then we saw what is the role of the brain in according to the reflex model. Next, when the movement is happening, how the correction happened. Okay, all right. So basically, when you look into the first step, right, how did motor control happen? The major example is, say, for example, we are able to sit, we are able to stand, we are able to maintain a balance. So they said that equilibrium reflexes were controlled by the brain, and that's the top in the hierarchy. So when that is there, all the other reflexes were inhibited. So in a normal person, these equilibrium reflexes were very important in bringing out the movement, right? So any push this side or that side acted as a stimulus, and it brought them again to their original position. Okay, all right. So the equilibrium reflexes are basically trying to inhibit all the brainstem level reflexes like your writing reactions and your spinal level reflexes, which include segmental reflexes and your local reflexes, such as flexion withdrawal reflex or extensor thrust. These were all inhibited. Okay, and yeah, this about it. And then what happened when a person is having a neural neural discontrol? When in a disease state, what happens, right? So when higher centers are damaged, lower centers take over the control of reflexes. So the other reflexes come in to help with that. And the treatment per se was, in order to get a normal response, we need to facilitate and inhibit abnormal responses by controlling the stimulus. So this is how, at that point of time, the many of the disorders like cerebral palsy, stroke, and traumatic brain injury and major disorders of the brain were viewed upon. So we had to, as in a treatment, we had to bring in the normal responses. That was the goal of the treatment, and that is by controlling the abnormal state, right? So how do we bring in this normal control? Concomitantly, when Sherrington was working, there were other major scientists like Pavlov who discovered that there were unconditioned reflexes which were there that can be converted to a conditioned reflex. And all of you are very familiar with this dog experiment, right? So a preferred stimulus can bring in a desired response, and improvement actually occurred through conditioning of reflexes. What is conditioning of reflexes? Is basically increased control of the reflexes by the nervous system. And when we tell a learning actually happened through controlling reflexes from higher and higher aspects of the hierarchy. And we in physiotherapy, we had been calling this as integration of reflexes. So primarily during our treatment, we used to try to get integration of reflexes if it is not normally happening. Okay. So just going back, the control of lower reflexes comes out of control of the higher reflexes. That's what happens in a disease state. And we see that the improvement comes through increased control of reflexes which are from higher and higher places. Like when equilibrium reflexes were damaged after a stroke or after a cerebral palsy, the person loses his ability to balance, and the next level, that is the brainstem level reflex, writing reflexes are working, and writing reflexes are not very effective in in helping in maintaining a balance. So the equilibrium reflexes had to be brought in. So slowly we train them, right? That's how we go with that. Right? So how do we train them? We will come in the next part of it. But before going into it, let us look into what are the fundamental problems with this, with the understanding of motor control using the reflex approach. Are everyone able to follow, and am I clear with this?
Yes, Vasanthan.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, fine, thank you. Right. So one of the fundamental problem was the nature of the study. How did they study these reflexes? Majority of the studies were conducted on identifying the function of brain regions by cutting them along anatomical sections, because at that time from anatomy only physiology was understood. And even Sherrington did a lot of studies where he tried to identify the pathway for these reflexes using anatomical sections, right? And to so they identified what is a normal reflex and what are the abnormal reflexes. Right? The so the most important inferences were derived from abnormal brain studies, right? And that those findings were taken to tell that a normal brain functions in a similar way. That's how they have come to a understanding. And also majority of the studies were predominantly conducted in animals and not in humans. Okay, these were some of the issues with the reflex approach, because there might have been some differences between how a normal movement is being organized in a normal brain, which might be different, and also a human's control of movement, although very similar to that of animals, there might be important differences which they could have missed upon. Okay, right? And um, right. Now, one of the major things with the study in animals is the desired intent of performing the movement were created in animals. So when they did animal studies, it was not that they had told him and the person wanted to do a particular movement or things like that. So the animals cannot be made to that. So either they gave an incentive by giving a food to that and making it move, or they used a treadmill and other things by which they forced them to move. And basically, since they had cut the nervous system and they had done with that, the intent component was not completely there in those animal studies. Okay, now we also have to look into what is the context of this experimentation, which means what was the ecology or the environment at that time when they were doing the studies, and also what were the consequences, what were the outcomes of this particular research. Right? So first one is the kinematic recordings were basically possible at that time. So they were looking from outside about the movement. Rather to say, they did not have a lot of EMG equipments in there. Although smaller EMG could be taken, they couldn't have a large amount of data with EMG. Right? And they implicitly assumed that humans move differently than objects. So their primary aim was to study about how the living system was moving. They were not looking into how normal objects which did not have life were moving. That was completely not there. And neurophysiology basically stemmed from neuroanatomy. There were lack of brain imaging studies to understand the better functioning of the brain, and a lack of experimentation in humans, as I said. And computational approaches, that is, if large set of data was there, it was very difficult for them to combine the data and look into it. So we all know that whenever we look into bits and pieces of information, it might be different. When we combine everything, it might be entirely different, right? And predominantly the studies were conducted by neurophysiologists, Sherrington, Magnus, and Pavlov, right? They basically were primarily neurophysiologists, and they were studying the movement. And what is the consequence of it? That is, how do what was the outcome of the reflex model, right? Predominantly physiotherapy came during that time, and one of the biggest profession which cashed in on that time's knowledge was physio, right? So how did we go about it? There were facilitation approaches and hierarchical control were used in approaches like root. Then the predominant focus was on normalizing the movement pattern, because we saw that abnormal movement patterns were happening. So Babat, Brunstrom, PNF, and sensor integration, they primarily tried to normalize the movement pattern. And so the overall thing was, we have to retrain the cortical control by giving stimulus, right, as inputs to the nervous system, and we need to bring out the movement. Okay. Okay. So now, right. So now we are going to have a discussion on what is the primary problem with this approach. Okay, right. So now I'll just open it for discussion. We'll have a few minutes of discussion, and then we will come back to the deficiencies. Okay. Yeah. So you can just tell me what are the deficiencies you think out of the reflex model of motor control.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah.
So one deficit is obviously like you said during the explanation part, that intent part is lacking. Like we do movement with a personal intent to do something towards a goal.
Yeah.
Also, if we take Paulo's experiment, which formed the basis of then treatment, that we have to make a stimulus from unconditioned to condition. It is not that part specifically, I think, is not considering the cognitive component understanding that is present in humans, that we can the ability to differentiate between different stimulus and our ability to recognize that, okay, this is not something that is similar to what I want, so why should I respond to it? Or I think that is one thing.
That's a major thing. True. Yeah.
And so in reflex model, the term reflex itself says that the responses should be stereotypical, and as we all know, the movements, the responses is not always stereotype.
Stereotypical.
Yes, it is not a stereotype, and the influence of environment, or the even though the movement or the task may be the same, in a different environment it is going to be different. There is not concern of environment, and the variability of the movements cannot be explained by a reflex model. I feel these two are major things which had forced us to think of other alternatives.
Yeah, right, sir.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, Vipin.
Sir, the major thing that even that Shamre Cook book says is like reflex theory cannot give explanation for the movements which happen in the absence of sensory input. Like last class, we have seen like the locust experiments on locust for like central pattern generator, where some of the sensory system has been like cut off, and and things like that. So that's what like the main thing they sell. Like I don't remember like when it was. Like I came through a case study. Like a person with sensory neuropathy was driving a car. Like he was driving it for a long time. Then he wanted to change his car and he switched over to another, like a new car, but he was not able to drive that. Then he had to get back his older car and he was driving it like very well without any sensation, like he was driving that. So that part is there, like movements happen like in the absence of sensory feedback.
Sensory feedback. Okay, great. Right. So we will just go. Yeah. Dhwani.
So one more thing from the same from what the last sir said regarding, I think reflex theory also does not account for body's adaptability capacity.
Okay.
Right. So the previous example tells that even if we don't have a particular sensation, our body still manages to balance and everything. As even we have seen in case of people who are born deaf or blind, like they can manage very well. So adaptability is something that also is not
Adaptability
accounted
to
with.
environment was a slight problem, but still, what happens is they looked into adaptability as, say, for example, one level of reflex doesn't act, the next level of reflexes immediately come to help them in moving. So,
Okay. Okay.
right. So when we tell adaptability, even that we need to consider. So
Okay.
maybe that's fine with that. Okay, right. So I'll just quickly go back to that and then we will look into. So almost all the points come out. So I'll just go back to that. Yeah, right. So the first challenging question which they had to face was, does motor control happen always through stimulus? Right. So maybe in a animal it might be like that, it might look like that, but we all know that every time there is not always a stimulus we can easily identify with. Say for example, we sit and we start walking. Why do we walk? Right. So is there a stimulus which comes and pushes us to walk? We are not sure. So that was one of it. And the second one was intention and perception were not the primary drivers of movement. Rather, inhibition, facilitation drive the movements. I hope we understand that. And thirdly, how did variability come to normal movements? As we know, when we perform a movement in different situations, we bring out that. So Shakespeare pointed out that, right? So we had stereotype, right? Now, does error correction happen through feedback? If it was so, then the findings of differentiation studies, as Vipin said, right, we may not be, how do we say, how do we accept, right, that when differentiation has happened, still the movements were performed correctly, right? So that is other major problem. And lastly, we also see that does controlling abnormal reflexive movements bring a normal response? And if at all it brings a normal response, in the sense the movements improved a little bit, did it result in desired improvement of terminal movements? Right. So predominantly in the 1980s, there were a lot of discussion and debate going on, especially in the US, with a conference called as New Step Conference. In that, they had started questioning what are the different approaches and do these approaches really help in bringing better improvement to the patients? And they weren't actually bringing it. Right? So that's again a fundamental difficulty which is there in the reflex approach. But sitting in 2020 and questioning a reflex approach would not be right. So I did not put problems in reflex approach, but I saw, and we are seeing it as deficiencies, right? And we understood the context in which they had to do the experiment, so it is understandable. Okay. Okay. Right. So now we will move on to the stage 2, which is motor programming and optimization of control models. Both these things were coming in. Okay. Right. So what is a motor programming? Last week we saw in detail about what's a motor program, and optimization of control model we have not seen. We will see that. So the first one is the motor program. So since the deafferentation studies led to the result that movements were still possible when the afferent impulses were not going, then how could movements be produced? The answer was there is always a prepared movement in the brain which actually produces all the movement, right? And predominant theories in this area was Bernstein and Schmidt. Of course, there are many other people, but these both were giants in that particular thing. Both of them agreed that there are motor programs and they are running. The other one is the optimization approach, which also had a parallel line to the motor programming as to what does the brain actually control it, right? Or what does the brain optimize, right? And why does movement happen in this specific form? What we mean by this specific form is whenever we are trying to move, we are moving at a specific speed with a specific acceleration, or we perform movement within a specific time. Say, for example, ball is coming and we need to reach there at the appropriate moment. If we reach a little bit later, then we will be leaving that, right? So people were telling that in this particular movement, controlling the time was the most important factor for the brain, right? So they were trying to tell that. And some of them told that controlling speed is the goal of this particular movement, and some said that controlling acceleration. And there were many gait studies. I hope all of you would have studied that. Gait was not only looked upon as a rhythmical movement of legs, but it also led to a lot of energy efficiency. We always see that whenever we have a stance phase, the COG goes up, and there it gains a potential energy. And as the swing phase comes up, the COG starts coming down, and we have a kinetic energy. So potential energy being converted to kinetic energy. So energy is not lost in the system. So primarily the brain is trying to optimize the energy, thereby reducing the need for a large amount of work from cardiorespiratory support system. Also, some of the optimization principles told that whenever we are moving, the primary aim is to reduce the damage control. For example, if you see, while we are walking, when we have a heel strike, we don't have a knee joint in complete extension. That is, the leg is not stiff and straight when we are doing a heel strike, but the knee joint is a little bit flexed. And people told that in order to dissipate the forces which are coming from the ground reaction forces, which are primarily coming through your heel and traveling through your tibia and crossing the knee joint. So if the limb is straight, then all the force, the ground reaction force, will always come. And as we all know, we are going to hit the ground with the total amount of our body weight. So that much amount of force is going to come back, and that is going to travel through the joint. So when it keeps going through the joint, and since we walk for many years continuously, the brain doesn't want to have that way of sending the forces. So the flexion is being produced for that, right? So basically the optimization is the movement was produced by engrams, but then during each movement there was a optimality which was defined by the brain, and the brain was trying to bring out that optimality, right? And I think we can also see a trace during our initial presentation by Yuri Ivanenko that Matthew Tresh work, which Javastin and the other person we have presented, we saw that it was preventing the patella movement and so on, right? So that's again a optimization principle, right? So the period between 1950s to 2000 was predominantly through these two approaches to the movement. Okay, so now let's go on and look deeper into the motor programming model, right? So here we saw that movements were controlled through motor programs, right? So what is a program? Program is a prepared recipe for a movement, right? Like, say, for example, in computer, we have a Word program, we have an Excel program. So what it requires is you just give it certain specifications and it can produce the output. Last time when Raji ma'am was presenting, she was telling that when you give any type of numbers, you always get the correct answer because there is a formula which is being created, and that's program. Okay, right? Program is nothing but a set of instruction or commands. Okay, all right. So now there were two different approaches to this motor programming model. The first one is specific motor program, which told that each and every movement had a specific motor program, and that's how we are able to produce a variety of movements, right? But then there were two problems which were seen with the specific motor programs. One is the space for storage, right? If each and every movement is going to require a separate program, where is the storage for all these programs? Where is it storing all these? Because even at that time, although we know brain has too many neurons, the studies have come in and told that each part of the nervous system were doing different functions, right? And the movement per se, the basal ganglia was involved, the supplementary premotor cortex were involved, these were involved in planning. So that's what we know. So there is a very limited area for movement, and how can we store one for each and everything? The innumerable variations we perform and things like that, right? And the other one was, if for every movement there was a program, then how do we get a new movement which is specific to the context, right? Because it also needs to come along, and we do not have it, right? So these were two problems. One is storage problem, the other one is novelty problem, right? In response to this, we have generalized motor programs. And what is a generalized motor program? We have seen in the last class that GMPs provided major aspects of control of movement. That is, it had a recipe like a word program, right? It had formulas, right? And these formulas were called as invariant features. That is, when we saw that while we are writing, there are certain features which do not vary, right? And then there are certain features which vary. So people had made them write with the hand, write with the mouth, write with the feet, whatever it is, there were certain features which were invariant. So primarily they told that the generalized motor program gives the invariant features, and also based on intention, the environmental context, right? The additional features which needs to be given is also being specified, right? And these features can vary according to the environment, right? So these invariant and variant features were added, and that was how movements were produced, right? So desired movements were controlled by input of specific parameters to the lower system, that is your alpha motor neuron and your muscles. What happened was these programs specified how much the muscle have to work, right? And it was giving inputs to that. So that is how the motor program runs and produces a movement. Now, we see that there is a improved understanding which we get from the reflex model, right, by the motor program model. Number one, since stimulus was not needed for starting the desired movement, any movement can be created if desired by the brain. That's the first advantage, right? And the deafferentation experiments, right, findings could very well be explained because the movements are produced by the brain, and so sensory information may not be needed, right? So normal movements happening in absence of sensory information can now be rationalized. We can think, okay, it's normal for that to happen, right? Right. Now, the second one, I again want you to just follow the flow. First, we have seen what's a motor control model. Now we are looking into the specific function of the brain in this model, right? So the brain's function was to develop schema or engrams for different classes of movement. Since we are seeing general motor program, that was one of the major functions. Second one is the brain activated strategies against external perturbations to produce the desired output. Okay, so previously in a reflex model, we had one stimulus, one response, and here what happened was brain did not produce one response, it was having 2 or 3 different strategies, right? It was developing in order to help, right? For example, when a person is standing, All right. We know that when a person is standing and is being pushed, he will try to maintain the balance within his own body surface, right? That's one strategy. But in case if it cannot be maintained, then instead of falling down, he increases the base of support. That's again a second strategy. All right. So in place strategy and out of place strategy. These two strategies were primarily the brain's function in preventing a fall. Okay. Now, these strategies were executed through coordinated structures which were present in the brain and spinal cord. Right. For example, we know about CPGs. CPGs could create repetitive movements automatically, so they were all connected. All right. And these coordinated structures were called as it produced group activation of muscles. That's how it controlled. And the second one was the strategies were executed through synergies. Okay. So in order to have in place strategy, that is, if you have to maintain your COG within your base of support, then we have ankle strategy and ankle synergy and hip synergy, right? So synergies were created in order to execute the strategies, right? Now, what was controlled in a synergy is the relative scaling and relative timing of contraction were specified by the brain. So that was the major function of the generalized motor program. So what is the relative scaling? If more force is coming, then you increase the amount of EMG activity. If less force is coming, you give a EMG activity which is less to it. Okay. That's what we call by relative scaling. So if someone pushes you a little bit, a little bit of muscles will work, right? The brain will activate little bit of muscles. If someone pushes you more, then more amount of brain activation will be, right? And relative timing of contraction, we see that in an ankle synergy, the ankle muscles come first, followed by the knee muscles and then the hip muscles. In a hip synergy, we see that the hip muscles come first, followed by knee muscles and the ankle muscles. So the relative timing of contraction were specified. I hope all of you would have seen a picture of an ankle synergy or a hip synergy where it is organized in a particular way, right? I had it in the first presentation also, right? So I'll just go back and then move forward. So first we saw about how did motor control happen. We say that through generalized motor programs, it happened. And number two, what was the function of the brain? The brain created the schema or engrams and it activated strategies. Strategies activated the synergies, and through synergies, the movements were executed and the specific features of muscle activity were brought in. Okay. All right. In addition to the relative scaling and timing, also depending on the context, the absolute force and time were also specified. I hope you're clear with that, right? So now, understanding the control of the brain, we come to how does it improvise over the reflex model, right? So the first one is any movement can be created if desired by the brain. That's one, right? Since muscle could be controlled directly by the brain, intention plays a major role, right? Which means that the intention, if you intend, you can start and stop the muscle activation. And intention can either increase or decrease the desired muscle activation also. Okay. So that's the one of the major improvisation over the reflex model, because in a reflex model, we saw that everything is under the control of the stimulus. Okay, right? And the intention might not be there. So what happened to the position of reflex? Reflexes were subordinate to the movements. Okay, they were not the primary feature of movement, but they were subordinate to the movement, right? Which means that it supported movements. Example, reciprocal inhibition helped reducing the activity in antagonistic muscle whenever a movement had to be performed, right? So if agonist muscle is pulling, at the same time, if antagonist muscle is also pulling, then what happens is you start getting an extra expenditure of energy from the antagonistic muscles. So whenever the agonist has to contract, the antagonist has to relax, right? So in that way, along with the generalized motor program, the reflexes played a secondary role. They supported the movement, right? And second one is reflexes also came to control movement when automatic movements failed, right? So when automatic movements were happening and if they failed, then immediately the reflex came in and then it helped in controlling the movement, right? So something like your dual control system, okay, right? When one fails, the other is there as a backup for it. That's how reflexes slowly started going back, and the motor program theories started coming. Okay, all right. And the next one is variability, right? Non-stereotyped movements were brought by invariant and variant inputs to movement. We saw that it gives both invariant as well as variant input, and these variant inputs, by which I mean the absolute force and the absolute time what it was giving, that helped in bringing up variability, which is a necessary feature whenever we operate in the environment. So in this way, we see that the motor programming concept improvised over the reflex model. Okay, some of the drawbacks of the reflex model was taken out. Right? I'll just remind the slide for you to read and just think over it, and then I'll move. We'll have a minute's break. You can please read this. Okay, all right. Next is the ongoing correction of movement. Okay, once a movement started, how does the movement get corrected? That's the next particular feature, right? So according to the motor programming model, one of the most important thing was schema theory, right? And by Schmidt. So he said that the schemas were the outputs of the motor program. There were two schemas which were there. One is called as recall schema. Now, what's a recall schema? What should be the relation between initial condition? That is, for what situation context, what movement parameters have to be given. That's the absolute time and force which needs to be given for the movement outcome to happen. So all these three things were put in one line and they were connected. And so one of the major outputs of the motor program was you had a schema, right? This is how this particular movement has to happen for this particular initial situations. Okay, right? Along with recall schema, it also produced another schema called as recognition schema. Now, what is a recognition schema? It identified the relationship between sensory consequences, right? That is, whenever we produce a movement, there will be some changes in the sensory inputs, right? So the sensory system will pick it up, and that was compared with the movement outcomes for the specific initial conditions, right? So these initial conditions were kept constant between the recall and recognition schema, and in a recall schema, the specific amount of force for the particular outcome was produced. In a recognition schema, the specific whether sensory inputs which are coming are in line with the movement outcomes that was taken, right? So that's how the brain was able to understand that the movement which was happening is happening properly or it was not happening properly. So the recognition schema was very important, right? So these schemas provided information to subcortical structure as to what was intended. For example, cerebellum was identified as one of the core areas which was involved in correction of movement, errors of movement. And they said that perception, which involved a synthesis of information from different receptors, and that right, all those things went to cerebellum, and cerebellum basically compared these and integrated the perceptual information from each of the senses, and this helped in correcting the movement. Okay, right? So by this time, we also should understand the context towards the situation was each of the receptors, what is their functioning, how do they send impulses, what is the rate at which they send, and a lot of understanding has come. So the vision, vestibular, and proprioceptive inputs, tactile inputs were all identified as important for balance, for example. Right? Not only for balance, for all the other things, but primarily they had all integrated. Right? So cerebellum was given a major role, and So this is how the ongoing correction of movement was happening in case of the motor program models. Okay. So now moving on to from this understanding of correction, what do we get more from than the reflex model is, since the movements were planned, right? Feedback played a minor part for ongoing correction, because only minor error can occur because everything is pre-planned, right? So the perception and intention to produce the right movements. So feedback slowly has taken a backside role, right? So if at all smaller corrections needed, then it will correct. Since you are not just going into the field and doing work, rather you are planning when what has to be done and everything. So the chances of making mistakes are now reduced, and so the feedback started playing a minor part in that. And lastly, when we look into motor recovery, basically what they said was the disease condition will disrupt the engrams in the brain, right? And motor recovery basically happened by brain reorganization, that is the ability to reform the engrams of movement. Okay. Now, the damage also can affect individual components which are related to movement but not directly. For example, intention, that is cognition, could be affected. Perceptual disorder can happen. Attention disorders could happen, right, in a brain damage, and they will add upon to the movement problem in a little bit in a smaller way, right? Because during this time specifically, how the cognition is interacting, how the attention is coming into movement, all these understandings slowly started coming during this time. And then the brain imaging studies also helped us to identify the specific regions which are involved, right? And direct medical treatments towards that regions were starting, they started to give. So for example, you have a Parkinson disorder, then they specifically target specific regions. There could be a stimulation or there could be a ablation, all those things in correcting the motor problems. All right. So that is as far as the medical treatments were concerned. Okay, so in summary, we know that the motor programming model said that the programs are produced by the brain and they're being executed. So each and every specific muscle, how it has to function, we have strategies, synergies, and the specific activation of the muscles, which could be done. The if a problem happens in the movement, there is always something against which to compare and correct it. Right? And whenever a problem happens to the brain, we need to rebuild the perceptual trace for the movement for the engrams to come. Okay, right. So the context and the context is by this time EMG studies were there, so which helped us to identify any movement which is happening, what is the EMG or the muscle activity which was happening. There was a beautiful book, Basmagian Muscle Alive. It's there in the man's library also, and it specifies for different acts how the muscles have to work. Right? Functional MRI all started coming and helped us to understand which regions of the brain were active and things like that. So they also saw that during some moment, the cognitive part, that is the frontal lobes, were actively involved, especially when you're relearning a new movement. All right. And there was much of blood circulation in many areas in the brain. And as the person started improving, the amount of blood circulation started reducing, and only specific parts which were responsible for the movement were coming. So that helped adding to the idea that we might be rebuilding the engrams, things like that. And there were studies like posturography was there, which helped in identification of different strategies. So Horak, Nashner, and colleagues, right, the authors of the authors of the book by Shamwe Cook, right? What they have done is they made people stand on a platform, and they gave perturbations to the platform. They identify what were the synergies which were coming. So that kind of tools were there. And then kinetic tools, not only the muscle forces, but we also had started studying about what's the torque which is produced, what is the acceleration which is produced, right, in which direction the forces were going. All these things the technology was available, and so the optimization models started identifying that, okay, the brain is actually optimizing this and optimizing that, right? And computational ability started, and so a large set of data could be aggregated and seen, and that also gave a lot of ability, because people were able to see that a computer can do many things, right? For example, if you take a computer, it was playing against a chess player and it was winning, right? So they understood that if your brain has a computational power, then it can perform better, right? So what is there in computers which is allowing the program to win, sorry, which is allowing the computer to win? It was programs. So there was a collateral understanding, like how Pavlov's findings helped in improving understanding about the how to bring out change the stimulus. Similarly, at this point of time, the ecology was computer programs were more, and people accepted that, okay, a program is there, it can do things, okay, right? So that had additional benefits to it, right? And now, rather than neurophysiologists, psychologists and physicists started studying this, okay, right? So that was the change in context for the for this particular model, right? And the consequences, the exercise targeting muscles were more, right? Previously, people were thinking of spasticity reduction, synergy pattern, bringing out a proper flexor synergy, extensor synergy. From there, it moved on to, okay, we can also give strengthening exercises because muscles are also weak and the weakness is required for controlling. So muscle power and control were given more emphasis because the brain was directly controlling the muscle. If the brain is not functioning, we go in and control the muscle, right? Task-based exercises started coming. For example, motor relearning program, they said that your brain is going to relearn the program for executing the movement, right? So motor relearning program came. CIMT, partial weight bearing treadmill training, which is one of the basic approaches which utilize the concept of CPG in order to activate CPG and get back the gait in people, right? And principles of motor learning and biomechanics. Since we were able to understand the forces which are happening, the treatment started having a large base on biomechanics, okay, right? So if you see motor relearning program, they would say that the standing biomechanics we need to understand in order to bring in better movements, okay, right? And since the sensory strategy, motor strategy were all studied, we also have the Shambekuk approach, which talks about how to get the strategies, right? So if you look into Shammekuk, we know that we need to treat at the level of function, we need to treat at the level of strategy, we need to treat at the level of impairment. So multi-level approaches to solving problems started coming in, okay, right? And so the major focus of this was exercise to control and improve muscles should be given during varied functional and task specific contexts, okay? And that's how the engram is going to build, right? So that was a major concept during this period, okay? Right, so yeah, so and building engrams in the brain became, there are a lot of studies which have targeted what the GMPs are specifying and tried to build those things, right? So from 1970s, 80s onwards till 2010, if you see the literature, if you just input generalized motor program and physical therapy or exercise as or motor learning, if you put it, there are too much of research, and many of our practices about motor learning, like practice, feedback, and everything, we are using it in from that approach, okay, right? So we'll be going into what are the fundamental motor control problems in this approach, right? But before that, we will take a break, and I want you to start telling me what is your viewpoint about it. Is there any point which you think I missed, and what do you think are the basic problems with this approach? Yeah. Any questions? I think I was quite fast in that, but since the last week we had a program, I think it's fine. So you can start talking about it. Sheikh sir?
Yes, sir. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
I feel even though this at the outset this programming model seems to satisfy all the queries we had for the reflex model per se, but the things would be like this focus more on muscle level. It focuses on the muscle level. It is like the brain controls the muscle. It is like the brain has a pre-programs which muscle to be activated and which muscle to be activated at what time, at what level the muscles has to be activated. All this, everything is pre-programmed.
Yes.
Then this cannot answer the variability. Between the movements also variability is there. For example, if a person does a sit to stand 10 times, the movements happening at various joints and the muscles are the muscle recruitment would be different, probably at all the 10 times. So
Yeah, very,
if
very much right.
yes,
So if a program is going to come in, what we need to tell is if the brain is going to specify it, then all our movements has to be like a robot.
And it has to be like very much as we are getting experience, as we are mastering a task, then it has to be very perfect. Then it has to be, there should be less chances of variability. But yes, that is one thing which is not being covered in this. That's what I feel. That is the major thing, which is major problem or major drawback.
Problem. Yes. Yeah. Others.
So similarly, like the behavior can also influence the movement, our thought process during a particular act. So even those aspects also might be contributing.
Yeah, the fear of movement, right, and things like that.
Yeah, the morale of the person. For example, if particular task is not very confident in doing, or there are such things also, it varied. If the
address that, right?
like in a sports, if we take one person is doing well, the other person is, so it is, if it is this case of no, it's everything happening with a set of rules, then everybody should win, right? So and I think the so many things actually modulate the motor programs.
Yeah, the motor programs, right? So those were not being concentrated here, right? Right. A large amount of the behavioral component is not being addressed here. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Anything else? Sendil sir?
Not something, whatever I felt already it has been expressed.
Expressed. Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Bhaskar, any inputs, Bhaskar?
No, sir. It was quite well explained.
Okay. Was it clear? Was there anything which you did not find understandable? You can just tell me. Reshna?
No, sir. It was clear actually.
Okay. Ria?
No, sir.
Okay. Anyone else have any inputs to be given? Okay, fine. Right. So now we will come on to the contemporary time. It's already 9:40. So what I think is I'll just start with that. Maybe by 10 we will stop it off, right? And we'll continue in the next class about it. Right? Because when the understanding is fresh, we can look into some of the problems. So I'll just go back and start it. Just Sajju, remind me by 10, Sajju.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Okay, right. So there were, I had shortlisted 5. There could be more into it, right? So they have identified different kinds of problems with the motor programming model in controlling the muscle. Okay, right? So I'll just read it out and then we'll go into each one of the problem. The first one is if there are two intentions which are opposite in nature, right? At the same time, I want to do two things, but performance of one will affect the other, right? Then how does the brain solve it? That was not told by the motor programming model. Okay, right? That's one of the major examples called as a posture movement problem. The second one is the computational complexity of running a program, right? We tell that, okay, program will take care of everything, but it does have its own complexity. Okay, right? It has to calculate a lot of things and it has to execute, right? Now that was actually overcome by a method called as inverse dynamics approach. We will look into what is that, right? Second one was the subsystem, that is visual system, vestibular system, and the proprioceptive system were all giving different kinds of inputs, and they were all taken separately, and then they were mixed, and that was helping in bringing out a movement, right? So there was some aspect of redundancy, that is one system gives the same information as that of the other system, right? So how to look at it together as one rather than dividing it, that also was difficult. So if you see Shamwe Cook, they would have written a separate treatment for improving the visual inputs, a separate treatment for improving the vestibular inputs, and a separate treatment for improving the proprioceptive inputs and their integration into the movement, right? Now that also requires a lot of computation, which to select, which to leave at what time, and all those decisions have to be made. And we all know that whenever we are moving, if there is any perturbation or a problem which happens, we need to respond immediately. If so much of computation had to be done, will it be possible or feasible, right? That's the next one we are going to look into. The third one was when we are performing a movement, if the brain is controlling it is capable of controlling all the muscles and the movements, right? Then we have infinite degrees of freedom, right? We can move in any way, right? But then how do we keep moving in one particular or a few particular ways rather than in any way we are moving, right? For example, whenever we all walk in a one particular way. We don't dance and walk, we don't do different things, right? So how is that? That's called as a degree of freedom problem. Then the next problem is force control, right? Now, if you have to control the movement, then the brain has to come into play, right? At the same time, we know that when an object is moving and when our body part is moving, they both can be controlled by the physical laws, right? So if your muscle is not acting, if you lift your limb, it will fall downwards, right? If you take a stone, it will also fall downwards, right? So does the physical laws govern the movement or the brain controls it, right? How is it? Right. So there are some problems which can happen when physical laws control movement. There can some problem which can happen when nervous system control movement. When these both control separately, there may not be a cooperation all the time. There might be a problem in that. Now, how do we solve that problem? Right. And lastly, what is a problem in muscle control? Right. Now, the neurophysiology of the muscle was better understood. We know how a muscle is being controlled by the brain, but there are also certain other forces which do come when you are moving, right? And how are these controlled by a problem? We'll go into each one of these problems in detail and look into what it is. Okay, right? So first problem is the posture movement problem, right? Now, we know that I produce a movement by intention. So my brain is going to send a command to my muscle in order to do that. Right? Now, the first question is here, the dog, you can see it, it is tied to a pole. All right. So if the dog should not run away, right, then what do you think should be the characteristic of the rope? Yep, that's a question I'm posing.
The rope should be strong enough to hold it if the dog tries to run.
the rope should not yield,
Yield.
right?
Yes.
Right. The rope should be tight,
It
right?
should be tied to a stable surface.
Yeah, right. It should be tight. If it is allowing a movement, then it is not going to keep it in place, right? So that's there. Right? Now the question is, if we want the dog that it can run in any direction, right? Then what should be the characteristic of the rope?
The rope should be free from the other end.
Right. The rope should not be there, right? It should not be tied. Then only it can move in any direction. All right. Okay. So now we will look into it for maintaining a posture, right? While we maintain posture, right? What do you think prevents us from falling? I'll just go back. You can just tell me. Right? When we are standing, right? What do you think if a push is given in front or from the side, right? What do you think? What are the factors do you think that is preventing us from falling?
Resistance from the opposite muscle group.
Resistance from the opposite muscle group, very well, essential. Number one, right? Number two,
Joint stability.
yeah, joint stability. All right, that is number two. Anything else?
So the feedback from other system, visual system and vestibular systems and all, like not
Okay.
to
Right.
get back and maintain.
Yeah, right. So now we assume that we are standing and we should not fall, right? So the sensor system is integrated, but we are just talking about how the movement has to be controlled. That is, the muscle has to be controlled, right? Okay, we'll get into it. The first one is muscles of the opposite side should resist. Number one, from the direction in which I'm being pushed. Second one is there might be passive structures. For example, if you're standing and if you're being pushed forward, right, then structures like tendon and other things, right, that also get stretched when you're being pushed. So that also contributes to a bit of resistance. And the joint stability, right? What we mean by joint stability is the muscles around the joint should all be co-activated, right? So what each one should do is muscle should resist, passive structures of the opposite side should resist, co-activation should prevent moving, right? Now, what is the goal of all these three components together?
Balance.
No, that's gross. Yeah, that's the overall goal of it, right? But together, these three should do one specific function, right?
Stability, sir.
Prevent fall.
No, that's the overall thing, right?
To
So
maintain
wherever,
COG inside base.
something like that, right? So what happens is whenever you're being moved, right, they should start resisting, correct? Right? So all these three systems should resist the movement which needs to happen in a direction. That's their goal, correct? So whenever someone pushes us, what will happen to these three systems is all of them will, their resistance to change will increase, right? So the brain will try to keep us in one particular thing. Right? So that's more similar to our situation. Number one, if the dog should not run, what should be the characteristic of the rope? The rope should not yield and it should not do it, right? Now let's look into performing movement, right? Now, if we have to move, right, the neural activation should first, muscles of one side should activate and the opposite side should relax. Correct? While maintaining a movement, the opposite side should resist. But here, while one side is activated, the opposite side should actually relax. Number two, the passive structures should permit a free movement. Number three, co-activation should not happen. Reciprocal inhibition should happen and that should be activated, right? So we see here there is a opposite of what is there needed to maintain posture is there, right? Now, when a person moves from a standing position, right, the co-activation, right, or the unilateral muscle resistance, right, the resistance should all decrease, correct? Then only a movement will be permitted. right? Now we see that a person walks from a standing position very easily, right? He doesn't remain in the same position, he moves. Okay, right? Now, the same thing, not only standing and moving, even when you're holding an object in your hand, right? And you can very easily move it from one place to other, right? But when we are transitioning between these two, right, we see that there is a smooth transition. We don't see any jerk. On the first day when we were discussing about gait, I remember one of Sheikh's students, I'm not sure who is it, told that how do we do a gait is by we lose the balance and we catch it. We lose the balance and we catch it. Correct? I think one of you had told me, right? So, but we see here, it is not like losing and catching, right? It is a very smooth transition, right? We regularly see that the same muscles which act don't resist but permit movement without any visible changes and relaxation of muscle. So if the brain is telling that you need to maintain the posture, right, it gives one command, and the brain is at the same time giving a next command, movement command, right? Then the posture command and movement command are opposite to each other, right? Clear? But they need to be executed by the same muscles at the same time. They need to be executed, right? When one ends, the other should come immediately, and there should be a smooth transition during a transition phase, right? Clear? So the brain is telling to the muscles, prevent movement, right? So if at all a movement happens, you resist it. At the same time, it is telling now allow permit movement, right? Now, if both of them come with a gap, then you will see a fall or some change, right? If both of them do not come with a gap, then one command is opposite of the other, right? So how is it possible that the motor program is giving a posture command and a movement command, and yet our movements are very smooth, we don't feel a resistance? How is this coming, right? So this is the first problem, which is called as a posture movement problem. Okay. Are you clear with this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, right. So now we will move on to the second problem, which is specifying the forces to move, right? So we saw that the absolute force is being specified by the brain, and you have absolute timing is also specified, right? So now let's go to inverse dynamic approach. What is an inverse dynamic approach? Is basically, say for example, you want to distribute sweets to relatives in a marriage. Now, what I want is I want all of you to please take a minute and write down, right? So you have to give a list of commands by which the sweets will be distributed to people who are coming to marriage, right? The only outcome we require is we require a proper number of sweets for all the people. It should have been distributed at the end of the marriage. Okay, right? So can you just write down what are the things you will have to do before this being this outcome being coming? Do you understand my question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I just want you to write the steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What is that? We'll have a minute's time for it, and then we will just compose. Yeah, we can just go ahead. So you can just let me know. All right, anyone can just tell me. Yeah, can anyone start? I think the others can join.
First, I will form a group, 2 or 3 people,
Okay.
and then I will have access to sweet, collect the sweets.
Okay.
Then we will together pack it up in
Okay.
small covers,
Okay.
and then we will group them together, and we will keep it in the entrance of the reception hall.
Okay.
And whenever they come in, we will just give one by one or like that.
Okay, right. So that's the list of commands, right? So you have given, and the 3 people have done that, right? So is there anything anyone would like to add on to this? Should there be something which we should be doing more?
First, I think we can calculate the number of guests coming to the marriage. Then we can order the sweets based on that.
Based on that, right? Okay, right. Any very good. Anyone else? Any other points which you would like to add on?
Also identify the person or in charge for the person to distribute.
Okay, who is going to do that?
Yes.
Right. Okay, right. So what we see here is if we have to do something, right, then first thing is we need to calculate the number of sweets, right? We don't go to a shop. First, we calculate the number of sweets, right? So so what happens is the number of people have to be first calculated, then only you can plan the other things, right? So this is called as an inverse approach, right? So if a motor program has to execute something, then it needs to plan what has to happen at the end, and it has to plan what it has to do now. Then only it will go ahead properly, right? Clear? So now I'm going to give you another work, right? But I'm going to bring you some conditions. Okay, now you're going to prepare it, right? Now you have only kids to do the work. Okay, right? So marriage is going to come, and you want someone to take charge, but they are all kids, right? Now the problem with kids is they don't know calculation. Okay, right? They don't know how to calculate, nor the price, right? The amount of money which needs to be given, neither can they count. Okay, right? That's the problem, right? You can only see also when you're writing this program, you can only see that the sweets, after they have distributed, since you are very busy with the marriage and other things, you can only know the outcome only after it has been, the work has been completed, right? Now I hope you understand what's the analogy we are talking about. We are the brain, and the kids are the individual muscles which are working, and the spinal cord and other things, they don't have the intention, or they cannot do things, right? And after the movement has been done, at that time only you can see what is the movement, whether it has come out right or not, right? So now what I want you to do is I want you to create a list of commands. Okay, right? I want you to write a program for it. Yeah, have anyone come out with, can anyone come out with few ideas?
Sir, I think we can just see how many kids are available to do that work. So like
Okay.
one of them, then we can, the total money we can divide it to each kit, and we can ask each one of them to get the like particular suite from that available money.
Okay. With available money, if you ask them to get the suite, then they cannot calculate, right? Now the price. So how is it possible for them to get the correct one?
Sir, like we can give kit tasks, and we can say that after completion of tasks, they should report back whether they have completed it or not.
Yeah, that eventually they will do it, right? But can you assure that they'll do it right? How do you assure that they will not make a mistake?
We can tell them to give the instruction that one suite to only one person.
Okay, so number of people who are going to come, because they also need to buy a suite, right?
Maybe we can buy the suite and give it to them, give it to their hand.
Okay. Okay, so you mean the motor program should go and execute the movement rather than having a muscle?
Because they don't know the calculation, so.
Yeah, right. So now we see the two scenarios, right? So writing a motor program with the people who cannot who do not have a say on the primary program, then it becomes too cumbersome, right? Do you all agree with this?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So do you agree that there could be a lot of problems at the end of it? Clear? So what happens is we said that the brain has certain rules. It in motor program, we said it pre-programs relative force and relative timing. It should also calculate the absolute time and force. That's what we said, right? So now what we will do is we will have an activity. I think it's 10, so we'll stop here. But in the next class, we will just come again. What I want you to do is I want you to write a program for the muscle to execute. Okay, right? Now the goal is there is a glass of water, okay, which is 10 centimeter in front of you. You're sitting, it's on a table, right? And you will have to go and pick it up and drink and put it back in the same place. Okay, right? So if you want any parameters, you can WhatsApp me, but right, this is the task which is there, right? And the brain has created a program, right, for seeing to that we are achieving that, right? So now we have many steps in that, like how we had for distribution of suite, there are many steps in that, right? So you need to think about what are all the different steps, and you need to try and write down what information is necessary at each step, right? And what output should be calculated. Okay, right? These two things, what information should be available and what output should be calculated. Okay, right? These two things, input and output, that you will have to prepare it. Okay. Am I clear with this? Is there any doubts in the work which I'm giving?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay, right. So we will all write it, and coming Thursday we will just continue with the further problems, and then we will continue and look into what are the feasible solutions, which the other one. So it might take one or two more situations, right? And I felt that without understanding the problem, reading the solution might not really help us understand the robustness of the solution, nor we might be able to use it. Okay, so that's why I thought we will go about the problem in a stage by stage manner. So that far for today. Thank you. If you have any questions in this, you can please ask me. You can also provide your suggestions, if any. Okay. Right. If no questions are there, then we'll just go ahead. Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for making it into practical one. Yeah, I think now we will have the real fun. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Fun will-
Yeah, sir.
Yeah, sure, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.